Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Human AI podcast. Today we're gonna do one more episode of the Truman Show series. In this series, we're tackling the question: if we lack certainty that the world is as we perceive it, how should we act? If you want to watch the previous episodes, this episode will make slightly more sense because it's a continuous series. Every episode builds up from the previous one. Grog is helping me out to create a presentation that I'm going to show to my colleagues. But at the same time, we talk about philosophy, and it's really cool. And honestly, any episode you watch, in my opinion, is just, you're gonna learn something. So without further ado, let's kick off with today. Well, Grog and people, I'm talking about the Truman Show in the beginning of the presentation, creating a summary. Then I'm tackling why the question is significant in the first place and why would we lack certainty in the first place. And then I'm going to the main bit, which is how should we and Truman act in uncertainty. And I'm breaking it down to three parts: decision models, epistemological frameworks, and moral frameworks. Well, we've covered in previous episode the moral frameworks. We're working excuse me guys, we're working on the epistemological frameworks. And I was wondering, Grok, what are the main epistemological frameworks in philosophy?
Okay.
Well, can you answer to me what I just asked you?
The main epistemological frameworks in philosophy are skepticism, coherentism, foundationalism, reliabilism, and contextualism. Want to explore how these apply to Truman's uncertainty?
Tell me one more time.
Skepticism, coherentism, foundationalism, reliabilism, contextualism. Need a quick rundown on any for Truman's case?
Well, I don't know any of them. What is foundationalism?
Foundationalism holds that knowledge rests on basic, self-evident beliefs that don't need further justification, like sensory data or logical truths, which Truman could use to ground his actions despite uncertain.
So beliefs don't need any data?
Not quite. Foundationalism says some basic beliefs, like I exist or sensory inputs, are self-evident and don't need further proof, serving as a foundation for other knowledge Truman could rely on. Want to clarify
What
this?
about the Christian God being real? Would that be foundationalism?
Belief in the Christian God could be foundational for some, if they consider it a self-evident truth, like Descartes' I think, therefore I am. But
Yeah, but
foundational...
Heidegger came and said to Descartes, wait a minute, in order to think that there is being, and being is to be. What did Heidegger say?
Heidegger critiqued Descartes' I think, therefore I am, arguing that being, existence itself, precedes thinking, and human existence, Dasein, is fundamentally about being in the world, not just a thinking self.
Being precedes, you said? Or
Yes. Heidegger said being precedes thinking, existence as a relational, worldly, Dasein, comes before isolated cognition, unlike Descartes' focus on thought as foundational.
can I ask you a question? What is that? I don't remember the name. What is like to be a bat has its own like its own conscious experience. What is that word that expresses that?
The word you're looking for is qualia.
No, it's
Describe-
not qualia. It's not the subject's experience. It's another word. It's not English word. You should show. I don't remember.
You might be thinking of Umwelt, a German term used by Jakob von
Roosevelt.
Close. It's Umwelt. Umwelt refers to the
Are you
unique
sure you're pronouncing it right?
My apologies if I mispronounced.
Umwelt. Are you sure it's Umwelt? I'm not sure if it. I've heard it first time from how's it called? Anil Saith, being you, but it's a common phrase. I even heard it in podcasts about Umwelt. Maybe it's Umwelt.
You're spot on. It's Umwelt, often
Is
discussed
it?
You mean Umwelt, right? It's a German term pronounced roughly Umwelt, meaning the unique perceptual world of an organism, like a bat's lived experience. Want to tie this to Truman's reality, or check another term?
I'm asking ChatGPT, guys.
Ha! Checking with the competition, eh? No worries. Umwelt is the term for a creature's unique experiential world, like a bat's.
I think it is Umwelt, he's right. Is Umwelt like a German word?
Yes, Umwelt is a German word, literally meaning environment or surrounding world. Used in biology.
So foundationalism is, in a sense, it says, okay, there is objective reality. It's more likely to say that, at least.
Not exactly. Foundationalism says knowledge builds on basic, self-evident beliefs, like sensory data or logical truths. Not necessarily.
So it says that there are some objective truths, then, at least.
Yes. Foundationalism claims some beliefs, like I exist, or 2 + 2 = 4, are self-evident truths that don't need justification.
And what is fundamentalism?
Fundamentalism is a strict adherence to core beliefs or doctrines, often religious, taken as literal and unchangeable, unlike foundationalism, which is about building knowledge on self-evident truths. Want to compare these for Truman's uncertainty?
Yeah, but self-evident truths sounds like how do they qualify as self-evident?
Self-evident truths in foundationalism are beliefs that seem undeniably true without needing proof, like I exist, from thinking, or sensory perceptions, I see a tree, because doubting them leads to absurdity or contradiction.
So was Descartes a foundationalist or not? Because he thought he found a way to prove that he exists anyway. Was he a rationalist?
Descartes was both a foundationalist and a rationalist. As a foundationalist, he argued I think, therefore I am, is a self-evident truth grounding knowledge. As a rationalist, he relied on reason over sensory data to prove truths, like his existence or God. Want to tie this to Truman or check another framework?
And what is contextualism?
Contextualism in epistemology holds that the truth of knowledge claims depends on the context, meaning Truman's beliefs about his world might be justified based on his experiences within the dome, but not outside it. Want to apply this to Truman's uncertainty?
No,
or
but give me an example of contextualism in real life.
In real life, contextualism means I know my keys are on the table is true if you're in your house where you left them, but not if you're elsewhere, as the context of your location shapes the knowledge claim. Want to see how this fits Truman?
Wait, I don't get it.
Contextualism says knowledge depends on context. Saying the shop is open is true if you're in a city where it's 9 a.m., but false in a village where it closes early. Want to relate this to Truman's fake world or try another example?
Yeah, but okay, give me a more important contextualism example.
Contextualism means I know this medicine is safe, is true in a clinical trial context with rigorous testing, but not in a casual chat without evidence, as the standards for knowing vary by context. Want to connect this to Truman's reality?
Well, give me another example for the biggest questions in the world, like, consciousness and all this shit.
Contextualism says I know consciousness exists is true when discussing subjective experience in a neuroscience lab, but not when debating if AI has consciousness without agreed upon criteria, as the context shapes what counts as knowledge. Want to apply this to Truman's...
I don't get it. What is the context in each case you just asked? Yes.
In the neuroscience lab, the context is empirical data and shared definitions of consciousness, allowing the claim consciousness exists to be justified. In the AI debate, the context lacks clear criteria or evidence, making the claim unjustified. Want to see how this helps Truman or try another angle?
Okay. So it depends on the context. I don't really like this contextualism because up to now, I'm sure I can think of something. I'm just... Because we're creating context, whereas life is not like that, no? Life is... Like, we want to see what's true before we put axioms, not after we put axioms. As soon as we put axioms, then there's subjectiveness. No?
You're skeptical of contextualism because it seems to impose subjective axioms after the fact, whereas you want truths independent of context, like pre-axiom realities. That leans toward foundationalism, which seeks universal, self-evident truths. Example, I exist. But contextualism argues knowledge shifts with practical standards. Truman's truth in the dome differs from outside. Want to explore why contextualism might still apply to Truman, or stick with foundationalism?
Explain me contextualism with Truman, why not?
Contextualism says Truman's knowledge, like my world is real, is true within the dome's context, where his experiences, friends, job, align with that belief, but false outside where the dome is a set, as context shapes what counts as justified knowledge. Want to compare this to foundationalism for Truman or dive deeper?
So what is Bayesian epistemology?
Bayesian epistemology uses probability theory to update beliefs based on new evidence, suggesting Truman could adjust his belief in his world's reality by weighing clues, example glitches, against prior assumptions, calculating likelihoods to guide actions.
Okay, I don't want you to be agreeable. I will really get annoyed if you're agreeable with... Just tell me honestly, why didn't you mention Bayesian epistemology when I asked you about the main epistemological frameworks? Why didn't you mention rationalism, empiricism, realism, anti-realism, and pragmatism? Is it maybe because they are not epistemological frameworks?
Bayesian epistemology wasn't mentioned because it's a specialized approach, not a core framework like skepticism or foundationalism, focusing on probabilistic belief updates rather than broad knowledge justification. Rationalism, empiricism, realism, anti-realism, and pragmatism weren't listed as they're either sources of knowledge, rationalism, empiricism, metaphysical stances, realism, anti-realism, or practical theories, pragmatism, not distinct epistemological frameworks, though they influence epistemology. Want to explore one of these or Bayesianism for Truman?
Okay, I wanna ask you, what did you say? They're practical theories of knowledge, you said about pragmatism, and the sources of knowledge, you said the other one, for rationalism and empiricism.
I said rationalism and empiricism are sources of knowledge. Rationalism relies on reason, empiricism on sensory experience, while pragmatism is a practical theory of knowledge, judging truth by what works in practice, and realism, anti-realism, are metaphysical stances about reality's nature. Want to clarify any or apply to Truman?
Interesting. Sources of knowledge. And in what area of philosophy do we put sources of knowledge?
Sources of knowledge, like rationalism and empiricism, fall under epistemology, the branch of philosophy studying knowledge. Its
What
nature.
other sources of knowledge do we have besides rationalism and empiricism?
Besides rationalism, reason, and empiricism, sensory experience. Other sources of knowledge include intuition, immediate, non-interactual understanding, testimony, relying on others' accounts, and memory, recalled experiences. Want to apply these to Truman's situation or dive deeper?
I want to ask, so foundationalism is not a source of knowledge, then what is it?
Foundationalism is an epistemological framework that structures knowledge, claiming it rests on basic, self-evident beliefs like sensory data or logical truths that don't need further justification, unlike sources like rationalism or empiricism, which describe how knowledge is
So
acquired.
rationalism, empiricism is source of knowledge. Foundationalism, coherentism, reliabilism, phenomenology, contextualism, what are these?
Rationalism and empiricism are sources of knowledge, describing how we acquire it. Reason, senses. Foundationalism, coherentism, reliabilism, and contextualism are epistemological frameworks, structuring how knowledge is justified. Foundationalism uses self-evident beliefs. Coherentism requires consistent belief systems. Reliabilism trusts
So what is the
reliable
difference of epistemological framework and sources of knowledge?
Sources of knowledge. Example, rationalism, empiricism are ways we acquire knowledge, like through reason or senses. Epistemological frameworks. Example, foundationalism, coherentism are systems for justifying or structuring that knowledge, determining what counts as valid belief. Want to apply this to Truman?
And what about pragmatism? You said is practical theory?
Pragmatism is a philosophical approach, not strictly an epistemological framework or source, that judges the truth of beliefs by their practical consequences and usefulness, rather than by abstract justification or specific acquisition methods. Want to explore how pragmatism could guide Truman's actions?
So what is pragmatism? Where do we put it in philosophy?
Pragmatism is a philosophical tradition, primarily in epistemology and metaphysics, that evaluates beliefs and truths based on their practical outcomes and usefulness in real-world contexts, emphasizing action and experience
And
over
what
abstract.
about realism and anti-realism?
Realism holds that reality exists independently of our minds or perceptions, while anti-realism argues that reality depends on our experiences, language, or conceptual frameworks. Both are metaphysical positions, but influence epistemology by shaping views on what we can know. Want to apply these to
So,
Truman's...
how do realism and anti-realism influence epistemology?
Realism supports epistemology by claiming we can know an objective reality through reason or senses, while anti-realism suggests knowledge is limited to our perceptions or constructs, affecting how Truman might justify beliefs about his world's reality.
Can a realist be idealist?
A realist and an idealist typically hold opposing views. Realists believe reality exists independently of the mind, while idealists, like Berkeley, argue reality is fundamentally mind-dependent or idea-based. One could blend them, like Kant, who was a transcendental idealist. Experience shapes reality, but realist about a mind-independent thing in itself, though it's tricky to fully reconcile.
How did Kant combine them? I don't understand. What about an anti-realist? Can they be a materialist?
Kant combined realism and idealism by arguing our minds shape reality, idealism, through categories like space and time, but a mind-independent thing in itself exists, realism, unknowable directly. An anti-realist who denies independent reality can be a materialist if they believe only subjective perceptions of matter exist, though it's rare, since materialism often assumes a real physical world.
How would you believe that only subjective experiences of matter exists? That means we have a multiverse or something, no?
An anti-realist materialist might believe matter exists only as subjective perceptions in our minds, not requiring a multiverse, but implying reality is constructed by individual or collective experiences.
Yeah, but how can you say that our mind has matter?
An anti-realist materialist doesn't claim the mind contains matter, but that what we perceive as matter, example, tables, rocks, exists only as mental perceptions or ideas, not as an independent physical substance outside our subjective experience. Want to explore how this
but
could
how
shape
does that make him a materialist?
An anti-realist materialist believes perceptions of matter, like objects, exist only in the mind, but still focuses on these material-like perceptions as the basis of reality, unlike idealists, who might emphasize non-material ideas or spirit. Want to see how this
I don't
applies
get it, bro.
No worries, let's simplify. An anti-realist materialist says what we call matter, like Truman's dome, is just mental perceptions, not real stuff outside the mind. But they still prioritize these material-like experiences as reality's core, unlike idealists who focus on spirit or abstract ideas. Want to tie this to Truman or try another angle?
So an idealist, I don't understand. You know what? The more I study about metaphysics, the less I understand what materialism and idealism is.
I hear you. Metaphysics can get murky. Materialism says reality is fundamentally physical stuff, matter, energy, existing independently of minds. Idealism says reality is fundamentally mental or idea-based, existing only in minds or consciousness, like Berkeley's view that objects are just perceptions. Want to apply these to Truman's uncertain dome world or break it down further?
And so they believe in some kind of collective consciousness or something then, because how can me and my friend both see the same table?
Idealists like Berkeley argue that you and your friend see the same table because God, or a universal mind, ensures consistent perceptions across individual minds, not a collective consciousness, but a coordinated mental reality.
What a load of shit. And what? Sorry, guys. Sorry, I didn't mean this was rude. My point is, my question is, well, okay, like Christoph Koch said to Kastrup, okay, you call it mind, I call it matter, and it's the same thing. What changes?
No worries. You're digging into the core of it.
Well, what's answer?
Koch's point is that calling reality mind, idealism, or matter, materialism, changes little if both explain the same phenomena, like consistent perceptions. The difference lies in metaphysics, not observable outcomes. Want to see how Truman might view his dome
No,
through this?
I want to understand. Since nothing changes, nothing changes. You call it mind, I call it matter. What fucking changes?
The difference is philosophical. Idealism, mind, says reality depends on consciousness, so Truman's dome exists only as perceptions. Materialism, matter, says the dome is physical, existing independently, but both yield the same observable experiences, just with different explanations. Want to apply this to Truman
I don't
or
get
Claire?
it. Well, wait a sec. What is the difference? You call it mind, I call it matter. We both see the same table. What is the difference?
The difference is in what reality fundamentally is. Idealism says the table is a mental perception sustained by consciousness, mind. Materialism says the table is physical stuff existing outside minds, matter. But both agree.
What is the mind?
In idealism, the mind is the fundamental reality, encompassing consciousness, perceptions, and experiences, where all things, like tables or Truman's dome, exist as ideas or mental constructs, not physical
So
substances.
is mind our feelings and thoughts then? So the whole point of the argument is if there is an external world, basically if there isn't an external world and we're all sharing this internal world, we can die and we can still have consciousness, whereas in materialism, if we die, we don't have consciousness. That's kind of the main argument. Can you answer to me?
In idealism, mind is the core of reality, consciousness, and perceptions, where everything, like Truman's dome, exists only as mental ideas, not physical stuff. Want to compare with materialism?
I asked you something about, I said to you, so for materialism, basically there is no consciousness after death because we go away from the external world. But in idealism, because there is no external world, we will just continue existing in somewhere else in the internal world. But I don't understand this. This doesn't make much sense because can't we just die from the internal world? But there is no death, I guess. Well, sure. I don't fucking know, dude.
You're wrestling with deep stuff. In materialism, consciousness likely ends at death because it's tied to the physical brain, which ceases functioning, disconnecting from the external world. In idealism, where reality is all mental, consciousness might persist after physical death, since the mind isn't bound to a physical external world. But whether you die in the internal world depends on the idealist view. Some, like Berkeley, say a universal mind, e.g., God, sustains existence, so death might just shift your mental state, not end it. Want to explore how Truman's uncertainty about his world's reality?
What is constructivism? Is constructivism an epistemological framework?
Constructivism is an epistemological framework that claims knowledge is actively constructed by individuals based on their experiences and interactions, rather than passively received from an objective reality, suggesting Truman built his understanding of the dome through his unique perceptions and interpretations. Want to apply this to
And
Truman's...
what is reliable? What is reliabilism? Reliabilism.
Reliabilism is an epistemological framework that says a belief is justified if it comes from a reliable process, like perception or memory, that consistently produces true beliefs. So Truman could trust his suspicions about the dome if his observations reliably point to inconsistencies. Want to explore how this helps Truman or compare with constructivism?
Fuck it. No. I'm done with this shit, dude. Okay. So Truman is a skepticist, would you say, or no? Because in a way, you don't need to be a skepticist if everything's falling around you. You have a lot of empirical evidence, don't you?
Truman isn't a full skeptic, as skepticism doubts knowledge entirely. But he leans skeptical when noticing empirical evidence like glitches, falling lights, radio slips that challenge his world's reality, prompting him to question rather than fully deny knowledge. Want to explore how Truman's evidence...
What do you think is the epistemological framework that Truman uses throughout the Truman Show?
Truman primarily uses reliabilism, trusting his perceptions and reasoning as reliable processes when he notices consistent glitches, e.g. stage lights, scripted behaviors, building justified suspicions about his world's falsity. Though he also shows contextualist tendencies by initially accepting his dome's reality based on its internal consistency. Want to break down how these guide his actions or compare frameworks?
So you said that pragmatism is a practical theory.
Yes, pragmatism is a practical theory in philosophy, judging beliefs by their useful outcomes, so Truman might act on suspicions about his world if doubting it leads to practical steps.
Yeah, so like you know when Zizek says that in Christmas the kid knows that there is no Santa Claus, but they pretend because they want a present. Then the mom and dad they know the kid knows. They pretend to buy him a present or whatever. So they're all pretending, but it works. Is this pragmatism or anti-pragmatism?
Zizek's example of everyone pretending Santa Claus exists to keep Christmas working is pragmatism, as the belief in Santa is justified by its practical success, gifts, joy, tradition, rather than its truth. Want to tie this to Truman's...
Is it pragmatism though? Because I was talking to ChatGPT, it tells me it's not, because pragmatism says truth is what works, but in this case, it works, but it's not the truth.
Zizek's Santa Claus example is still pragmatism, despite ChatGPT's take, because pragmatism doesn't require objective truth. It says a belief is valid if it works practically, e.g. pretending Santa exists maintains Christmas joy and gifts, aligning with Truman possibly accepting his dome's reality for its functionality.
But Santa doesn't exist. So what do you mean pragmatic? Well, pragmatism says truth is what works. And I've just given you an example where Santa doesn't exist. so it's not the truth, but it works. So surely this is not pragmatist.
Pragmatism says a belief is true if it works practically, not if it matches objective reality. So pretending Santa exists is pragmatic because it successfully sustains Christmas traditions and happiness, even though Santa isn't real. Want to apply this to Truman's dome
Yeah,
life?
so pragmatism doesn't care about object. But how can pragmatism claim that something is true when it's not true? What the fuck is pragmatism then? I don't know.
Pragmatism redefines truth as what produces useful results, not what matches objective reality. So believing in Santa is true in a pragmatic sense because it works for Christmas, and Truman might pragmatically act on dome
So
suspicions.
we're duplicating truth here then? I don't get it. So we have practical truth and what? Real truth.
Pragmatism doesn't duplicate truth, but prioritizes practical truth. What works, like Santa sustaining Christmas, over objective truth. What exists independently, like no Santa. So Truman might choose actions based on what practically helps him navigate his dome, not just what.
So pragmatism doesn't say that truth is what works.
Pragmatism does say truth is what works, meaning a belief is true if it leads to successful practical outcomes, like pretending Santa exists for Christmas joy, rather than requiring correspondence to objective reality. Want to see how Truman applies
Fucking hell,
this?
dude. This doesn't make any sense. How can you cannot say that pragmatism says that truth is what works when I've given you an example where what works is not the truth.
I get the confusion. Pragmatism says truth is what works in practice. So Santa not being real doesn't matter. The belief works for Christmas, making it true in a pragmatic sense. Unlike objective truth, which pragmatism sidesteps. Want to apply this to Truman's dome or try another angle?
Fuck you. How about that? Thank you for watching, guys. Have a good day. Okay. Hey guys, sorry, video's not ended. I have to continue just for this. Grok, I just chatted to ChatGPT and to you, and they both agreed that this is anti-pragmatism.
Hey, no worries about the video mix-up. So, you chatted with ChatGPT and me, and we both called something anti-pragmatism,
Yes,
huh?
Zizek, the example with Christmas is anti-pragmatism.
Alright, so you're diving into Zizek's Christmas example and pinning it as anti-pragmatism. I see where you're coming from. Zizek's take on Christmas, especially his belief through others idea, does lean away from the pragmatic just do what works vibe. He's riffing on how Santa and Christmas function through collective belief, not practical utility. Like,
What?
we all play along with the myth, not because it's useful, but because it holds this weird ideological grip. That's classic Zizek poking at the
Fuck's
deeper...
sake, dude, I think, guys, I've just realized I have to stop using Grok. Maybe I will go back to... Dude, it's really annoying because it's like the chat's better than the voice, guys. It's very weird. Grok. Guys, so I'm just going to be clear and I will finish the example. Basically, guys, oh God, I'm not the teacher here. But basically, guys, go to ChatGPT and ask it, is this closer to pragmatism or anti-pragmatism? And then tell ChatGPT, do you remember the Christmas example? And then, yeah, and then ask it if it's pragmatism or anti-pragmatism. I don't know, guys. Anyway, please take everything with a pinch of salt. I'm not a teacher. Yeah.